Now, the name Borussia Mönchengladbach is known now for being a lot closer to a synonym for crap than to being one of the best teams in the country. However, Gladbach were once a major player in the Bundesliga, and so here's the story of when Gladbach were good.
Ja, wir schwören, Schein und Bein, auf die Elf vom Niederrhein. Borussia, unser Dreamteam, denn du bist unser Verein.
In the 1960s, Gladbach began to promote youth players to the first team as they were performing in the upper reaches of the then regional leagues in Germany. And they had names such as Jupp Heynckes come through, and then later on they brought in players like Berti Vogts and Günter Netzer, all from in and around the small city in the west of Germany. However, due to the complicated manner of qualifying for the newly founded Bundesliga, Gladbach missed out on the inaugural season, and so then in the 1964-65 season they were playing in the Regional Liga West, which was the new second division. And during this time they had an average squad age of 21.5, and then under head coach Hennis Weisweiler they played this fast attacking style of football. And so due to this, an editor at the regional newspaper the Rheinische Post named Wilhelm August Hertmans gave Gladbach the nickname Die Fohlen Elf, or in English, the Foals. And since then, it's stuck and has went on to define a generation. And so in the Regional Liga season, in the West Division, Gladbach would finish first. Jupp Heynckes, Günter Netzer and another player called Bernd de Rook, all finishing in the top four for goal scorers that season. Finishing first meant they qualified for the promotion playoff to have a chance to qualify for the Bundesliga. And so in the playoff, they would finish top of their group, containing Reutlingen, Holstein Kiel, and Wormatia Worms, to earn promotion to the Bundesliga. And in the other group, they would be promoted alongside a team they would be intertwined with for the next decade, Bayern Munich. Unlike Bayern, this Gladbach side had a humble start to their debut season in the top flight, finishing 13th. The following season, they began to show flashes of their potential as they finished 8th. But during this time, they scored 70 goals along the way and recorded the then highest win in Bundesliga history, beating Schalke 11-0. In a couple of years' time, which we'll get to, they would go on to beat this. Entering the 70s, this became Gladbach's decade. Nationally, they won the title in back-to-back seasons in 1970 and 1971, finishing ahead of Bayern both times. However, unlike Bayern, Gladbach had to work differently and work smarter, not harder, to keep maintaining their success, because over the years key players would leave. Rupp would leave. Heynckes, who was integral to their promotion, would leave for Hanover. But don't worry, he would return 3 years later after leaving. And then what they would have to do is they would have to replace these players either with a smart signing or a player from the academy. And so over the years, this saw players like Alan Simonsen join from Denmark and Rainer Bonhoff be promoted to the first team. And it was this constant churn and conveyor belt that allowed Gladbach to begin to make waves in Europe. And in the early 70s, the most notable game of this was against Inter Milan. And so they met each other in the knockout stages of the European Cup in 1971. Gladbach beat the Italians 7-1 at Borussia Park, but that game doesn't exist. And that was due to a mysterious Coke can being thrown onto the pitch and hitting an Inter player, which resulted in UEFA calling the game off, and there would be a replay later down the line. So Gladbach would end up losing the second leg in Milan, and then they would draw the replay, or the replayed first leg, in Berlin. Like most things, there's a lot of conspiracies about this game. It suggested that maybe an Inter fan had thrown the can because Gladbach were like destroying Inter. Günter Netzer said he saw what happened and the Italian who was hit really overplayed how he was feeling. And the Coke can itself is actually currently at the Gladbach Museum at Borussia Park. But and you had like people like Matt Busby, who is the godfather of Manchester United. He described this as like the Gladbach performance against Inter as like football in its purest form. Like it's the best football he's ever seen. But despite this dodgy results, it didn't stop Gladbach. Over the next decade, they would make their waves in Europe. In 1973, Gladbach would lose their first European final against Liverpool in the UEFA Cup, losing 3-2 on aggregate. However, 2 years later, they would lift the UEFA Cup after beating Twente over 2 legs. Then in 1977, they would meet Liverpool once again, but this time in the European Cup final. However, they would lose again. Back in Germany, this era of Gladbach would win their first DFB Pokal in 1973, beating arch rivals Cologne 2-1 thanks to a goal from Günther Netz in extra time. However, it's not as simple as that, and this game is infamous. Before this game, Netzer, who is or was Gladbach's best player during this time period, and he's one of Gladbach's greatest ever players now, he decided he would leave the club at the end of the season and would move to Real Madrid. The head coach Weisweiler caught wind of this decision and was not happy about it, so he decided to bench the team's talisman for this important game and the last chance at winning a trophy following their loss to Liverpool in the UEFA Cup. When the head coach informed Netz of this decision to bench him, the midfielder replied, "I find that very brave of you." In Düsseldorf, because this final was being played in Düsseldorf because of the existence of East Germany, the two teams would play out a 1-1 draw, meaning the game would be heading to extra time, with players exhausted and just sprawled out on the field. Netzer noticed this, would go up to Weisweiler and say to him, "I guess I'll play now," practically subbing himself on. Minutes later, he would score the winning goal, as his departing gift for the club would be the Pokal. Despite Netzer's departure, Gladbach would still challenge in the Bundesliga, but would only finish 1 point behind the Bayern in second in 1973-74. A year later, they would get their revenge and would win the first of 3 Bundesligas in a row. However, during this time, legendary coach Hennes Weisweiler would leave Gladbach for Barcelona, where in Catalonia it would ultimately crash and burn due to his poor relationship with Johan Cruyff. In Weisweiler's place, Udo Lattek was hired, and Lattek was the former Bayern head coach and had gone toe-to-toe with Gladbach earlier in the decade. Lattek would build upon the foundations and lead Gladbach to their last ever league title to this day in 1977, and during this period, Alain Simonsen would win the Ballon d'Or too, but Gladbach have gone close to winning the title in those years since. In 1978, Gladbach were within touching distance of winning a 4th title in a row. But this would also go down in history for the wrong reasons. Heading into the final day, Gladbach were level with rivals Cologne in the table at the top, but their rivals had a better goal difference by 10 goals, an almost insurmountable difference to make up in one game. But Gladbach tried anyway. This game was peak Gladbach, peak Die Fohlen Elf. They took the lead through Heinkes, who would score in the first minute, and was relentless from then on, with Gladbach heading into half-time 6-0 up over Borussia Dortmund. The onslaught continued in the second half, and when Gladbach were leading 9-0, it was said to be 1-0 between Cologne and St. Pauli. The reason why it was said is because obviously then it was a lot different to be able to get instant updates. This would mean if Die Fohlen won 12-0, they would win the title. So they continued, and the game would end 12-0, with Heinkes scoring 5 goals. This was, and still is, the biggest winning margin in a Bundesliga game. The result was so bad, there was even talk about potential match fixing from Borussia Dortmund. But people have gone out and said, Dortmund, Gladbach was so clinical that Dortmund just got to a point where they gave up. However, Cologne ended up beating St. Pauli 5-0. Meaning despite their monumental effort, Gladbach would lose the title by 3 goals. And this would not be the first time Gladbach would go on to lose the title on goal difference. In 1979 they would finish 10th, and this would be the beginning of the end for Gladbach. Lattek left, Vokes and Henrichs retired, and key players also headed for the exit door. Heinkes would actually stay, as he would be Lattek's successor as head coach. In 1984, it was another poor year for Gladbach. Die Fohlen challenged for the title with Hamburg and Stuttgart, but would lose on goal difference, with the 3 teams tied on the final day. But with Stuttgart playing Hamburg, it was very difficult for Gladbach, and they would have needed a 13-goal swing to overcome Stuttgart, the eventual winners. They would also lose the DFB Pokal final to Bayern Munich on penalties, missing 2. One of these has been Lothar Matthäus, missing the penalty in what was his final Gladbach game before moving to Bayern. And again, there's been discussions because if you watch previous videos, you know the history about Lothar Matthäus. It suggested that, you know, obviously by Gladbach fans, that he may have missed the penalty on purpose. And this begun the steady decline of Gladbach. But despite this, they did win the Pokal in 1995, beating Wolfsburg 3-0 in the final. It was their first since 1979, but they did also have a rather embarrassing loss in the final earlier in the decade to Hanover, who were in a division below them. In 1998, they came close to their first relegation, but survived thanks to a dramatic final day of the season. They avoided relegation on goal difference. Gladbach finished 15th on 38 points. Karlsruhe finished 16th on 38 points with a -12 goal difference, while Cologne finished 17th on 36 points. So if any result went the other way, Gladbach could have quite easily been relegated. However, a year later they would be relegated to the Zweite Bundesliga, finishing last on 21 points. Gladbach would return to the Bundesliga in 2001 after gaining promotion from the Zweite Bundesliga, where they finished second, 3 points behind Nuremberg. In 2004 they would leave their iconic Bolkeborg Stadium, which is now a housing complex. As in, if the stadium was built into a bowl, like most German stadiums in that era, and there are just houses built in it. Half of the stands still exists, and it's like a public area now, which you can walk around in, and there's a memorial to the stadium. But there are now houses on it. And in 2004 they moved to the state-of-the-art Borussia Park. In 2007 they would be relegated once again, but returned. Then in 2011 they nearly got relegated again, needing to beat Bochum in the relegation playoff to stay up. But it was that head coach that helped define Gladbach over the next decade and brought them back, not to their peak, because obviously their peak is winning stuff, but at least somewhat close to it. Lucien Favre and the help of sporting director Max Abel, who used to be a player for the club at the beginning of the 2000s, Gladbach would begin their turnaround with smart signings such as Marco Reus, Torgen Hazard, Raphael, Lars Stindl, all joining and leaving over the years. And this peaked for Gladbach on the 7th of December 2019, when Gladbach reached the top of the Bundesliga after beating Bayern Munich 2-1. But, you know, the rest is history, and the rest is actually on the Poorly Explained Bundesliga channel, talking about how Gladbach were quite crap earlier this year. This is the story of Gladbach, how they've gone from being, well, it's how they are still a giant in the league, and one of, I think, the 5 most or 6 most supported teams in Germany. But you can argue that it's a bit, the 70s was a bit like Belgium in the international stage, just Belgium didn't win anything. So you have this small area, because obviously football in the 20th century is a lot different to now. Like academies aren't as like cosmopolitan, weren't as cosmopolitan, so they weren't poaching players from Berlin or France or whatever. Like these were players from the local area. And Gladbach were competing with the likes of Cologne. So the fact that they were able to find these players like Netzer, Vokes, Heinkes, Bonhoff, and build this successful team, it's a real lightning in the bottle moment, especially with Hennes Weisweiler as well. A real lightning in the bottle moment that they managed to get this success and make use of it and do it in what most people would probably admit is the ideal way, doing it with players from the local area that can identify with the club and the people. And obviously now, Gladbach are really it's a lot more difficult to do something like this nowadays. Because if you have a good academy player, they're going to move to Bayern or Dortmund or whatever, or wherever they can get their game time. You see it with Florian Wirtz as well. You know, Cologne produced Wirtz, but he leaves immediately to get game time and moves to Leverkusen, and obviously we all know what happened there. It's a lot different for Gladbach to achieve this sort of success now. And for them to even... It's over 30 years now since they won a trophy. And as I'm recording this, they've just been knocked out of the DFB Pokal as well. It will take a lot of work and a lot of luck along the way to be able to do something like this again. But let me know what you think. Like, what do you think of this Gladbach era? What do you think of Gladbach as a whole? Do you hate them? Are they crap? Or whatever. Let me know what you think below. And also let me know if you have any other ideas that I would like to cover in the future.